Thank you, Ms. Howe, and your staff for the report. Members, I have two questions to ask, and then I'll open up for everyone else. So with that, Mrs. Howe, the university obviously strongly disagrees with your findings and recommendations. What was the source of the data and information you used to analyze and support your findings and conclusions on your report?
I'll answer it, and then I'll ask Mr. Beyer to add to. It's my understanding that my staff worked very closely. I mean, on any audit we conduct, we work very closely with the entity we audit. The data that we use for all of the analysis in the report is data that we obtained from the University of California and from their IT folks. I have internal information technology experts who take a database and then, based on the audit request and the type of analysis that we think we need to conduct, will extract information from the database. What we usually want is we want the entire database. We don't want people to screen things out. So my staff worked on, my IT folks worked with the audit staff to identify what types of records we needed, what would we analyze, and then we circled back with the university officials, certainly their IT folks, to essentially validate what we were using as far as the data, and they agreed that the data that we were using for all of the analyses in the audit report was the appropriate data to use. So I don't know if, John, you have anything to add.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. My name is John Beyer at the State Auditor's Office. And yes, what the State Auditor said is correct. We did obtain data from the university's IT systems, its admission systems, its enrollment systems, and its accounting data. All that data was vetted with the university before the audit went out. We had numerous meetings with the university staff. We showed them all the graphics and allowed them to talk about how we obtained the data and what type of analysis we did. Our information technology staff worked extensively with the university's information technology staff to discuss that we're using the right data fields and that the analyses that we're doing were correct. So it was a very extensive process, as we do on any of our audits, and as we're required to do under generally accepted governmental auditing standards.
Thank you. As I mentioned in my opening comments, one of the more disturbing findings that stands out in your report is the university's lowering of its admission standards for non-resident students, making it easier for non-resident students to gain admission to the UC. In that report, the policy change resulted in 16,000 non-resident students admitted to the university in the past 3 years that were less qualified on every academic score than many California students admitted. Can you please describe any evidence you found to support the UC's decision to lower the standards for non-residents who made that decision? Who made the decision? I would also ask the university representative the same question as well.
Again, the policy was made in June 2011. It was something that the BORS was a policy that it decided on. Previously, in June 2009, it issued a policy that reaffirmed the original wording in the 1960 master plan about that non-residents admitted to the university should be in the upper half of the residents admitted to the university academically. The policy itself said, the revised policy in 2011 said that the non-residents should just compare favorably to the residents admitted. That was a policy that was approved through BORS and communicated to the Office of the President and the campuses.
Members, any questions? Assemblymember Williams.
First of all, I would like to thank the chair for allowing me to attend the meeting and especially wanted to see the presentation of the audit. I've read it. I think particularly there's some interesting and some good recommendations on making the Work Smart initiative mandatory and some other possible ways to save money. But I'm struggling with sort of the premise, the top line that you present to the community, which is that in-state students have been disadvantaged by the growth of non-resident enrollment. And I've made my mission for 6 years here to increase in-state enrollment, so this is something I take incredibly seriously. And we banged our head against the wall for funding to do that for a number of years. How financially would the university enroll more in-state students by enrolling fewer out-of-state students?
By looking internally and trying to save money. That's why I talked about that as far as the second half, because bringing in non-resident students, even though the university suggested when we originally started the audit, that allowed them to bring in more resident students, then they backed away from that when we pressed them. But we think that by reducing or capping the amount of non-resident students that are admitted to the university system, and UC looking internally and saying, how can we save costs? How can we redirect perhaps some of the state appropriations from some of those programs that have been consistently funded year after year? The $45 million that the UC itself identified with respect to 3 programs out of 18 where they felt they could free up that money, and that's general fund appropriation money where they could bring in more more resident students. It's not necessarily directly related to a non-resident gaining admittance, but the reason we say...
Wait. You just said it's not related to a non-resident gaining admission. That's my sort of my problem with this conclusion. I think it's fair to say that if the university were receiving more money from the state, they could enroll more in-state students, or if they saved more money by paying their administrators less, maybe they could enroll more in-state students, or doing other things, they could enroll more in-state students. But your top line makes it seem as if they could enroll more in-state students by enrolling fewer out-of-state students, and that's not true.
They would be able to provide opportunities to in-state students to enroll in the flagship schools and to enroll in campuses of choice.
But you're implying that it's a physical limitation when it's really a financial limitation. And
there are certain capacities
what I'm asking is, how financially does one displace an in-state student by enrolling an out-of-state student?
Financially, it doesn't necessarily displace a resident student. But capacity-wise, and I'm sure the university, they will talk about this as far as they've talked in the meetings that I was in with them, it's not a capacity issue. Well, if they're referring students to Merced rather than enrolling that student at UCLA, why are they referring students to Merced and with the understanding that those students will not enroll?
Sure.
Why not? If I wanted to go to Davis, why are you referring me to Merced? Why aren't you enrolling me at Davis if you have the capacity, regardless of how many non-residents you enroll at that campus?
Just have a question about test scores. So you're saying it's lower standards, but the average resident that is admitted has a lower SAT score than the average non-resident that's admitted. Is that not true?
A resident student having a lower
I mean, I have a table here. I'll give it to you. That shows that the average non-resident has had to have a higher SAT score, which kind of that kind of casts a little bit of doubt. I think you have solid evidence that there's folks who have had a lower GPA score, but if they have a higher SAT score, that kind of makes the academic standard a little bit more muddy, right?
Well, if you look at the last 3 academic years and you talk about the 16,000 students that were admitted to the UC system who across the board, SAT score, ACT score, and GPA on every level were below the median for a resident student, I would disagree with you.
I think you're taking part of the sample, and I'm just giving you the average. That's 2 different numbers, and I'm saying, well, the average number is probably kind of important.
But what we're suggesting in that figure is we're comparing the non-residents who are admitted to the system with every score across the board below the median for a resident student. Every single score for the median is the non-resident has a lower score across the board.
And then the last thing is on diversity. You make it seem in the report like it's decreasing diversity, but the university, by your own table's numbers, is increasing the amount of underrepresented minorities in non-residents. So the numbers from 05, 06 to 14, 15 go from Chicanos, Latinos at 15% to Chicanos, Latinos at 25%. That's kind of what we want them to do, right?
That is absolutely correct, but that is resident students.
Right. And you're saying that out-of-state students are not as diverse.
Absolutely not.
And therefore sort of water down our numbers.
That's correct.
Okay. That's
because
fair.
if you look at the non-resident, if you drop down to the next section of that table, let's look at Chicano Latinos. 4%, 5%, 6%.
Of the non-residents.
Of the non-residents. And again, as I discussed earlier, of the students who were referred to Merced, 8,423 of those students met the eligibility requirements to gain admittance to the UC. They were underrepresented minorities, and only 215 of those chose to enroll.
Yeah.
But if they were able to, perhaps, enroll in the campus of choice, we would have picked up at least 55% based on trends of those students in California.
If they were funded by the state.
Well, that's a premise that I know the university has put out there, and I disagree with. So the university is saying we are only going to enroll the number of students for which we receive money from the California legislature and the governor. Why can't the university look internally and say, we want to enroll more students because there are more and more students graduating from high school in California, and we want to be able to bring in more kids than the legislature and the governor has provided us funding for. We want to have a goal of bringing in another 3,000 students. So what do we need to do internally to cut costs to free up those funds? Do we need to look at some of those programs? $45 million.
Yeah. We absolutely need to look at those.
So I think that certainly and the legislature has had to make difficult decisions, and we acknowledge that there have been appropriation reductions to the UC. But when we look at a year when the legislature had to cut the UC's budget by over $600 million, and in that very same year the UC provides a general salary increase across the board that was $639 million, personally, as a taxpayer, I have a problem with that.
And I just think you're giving us a kind of convenient thing to blame, right? Most of us here, we wrote letters encouraging the UC to give those workers raises. And this legislature also voted to decrease UC funding, and the UC is now also at 70% of what their 2007 levels are. Mm-hmm. And, I think you're bringing up some important issues, but it's almost too convenient for us. We don't have to blame ourselves that we can't come up with enough money. We can just blame them because they're trying to come up with money by enrolling more out-of-state students. I feel like this report is really important. It highlights an important issue, but it engages in correlation and while believing that that's causation. Correlation is not causation. The amount of non-residents is a stupid, dysfunctional adaptation to the fact that we're not providing money. And I think that the UC should look internally to save money, but I think if we expect them to look internally, we should probably also look internally.
Absolutely, Mr. Williams. And
Assemblymember, if we can, I know we don't want to spend too. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I think Assemblymember Gibson, you had a question or two.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you for allowing us to convene this meeting. Let me just say that the auditor has done an impeccable job by disclosing these findings that brings us here today. And again, I want to thank her. I want to go back and just follow up on my colleague, Mr. Williams' line of discussion. There was cost savings that could be certainly recognized if it wasn't money set aside to do out-of-state recruitment. What was that dollar amount that was set aside to do that specific job task? I know we talked about you couldn't bring out and pull out the salaries, but what was the overall budget allocated for that?
The amount in 2014-15 was $4.5 million for non-resident recruiting.
4.5. So had they even lowered or put a cap on it, that could have been a cost savings that could have been focused on directly or indirectly for in-state students. Am I correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. With respect to the test scores, lowering the standards, So am I to conclude, based on this report and this audit, that in fact the university had lowered their standards just so that they can sell the seats of our interstate students to out-of-state students? That may not be fair for you to, I don't know, but can you comment on that?
We certainly didn't conclude in the report that they sold seats, but we certainly saw, as I was indicating in my comments and some of the answers to questions to Assemblymember Williams, is when they changed the standard to compare favorably, you see a trend, a very distinct trend in an increase in the number of non-resident students gaining admittance to the UC system, and many of those students, an increasing number of those students coming in with test scores, quantifiable test scores, that's how we were able to do our analysis, that are lower on every single score than a California resident student. Because in addition to the students that were referred to Merced, we identified another population of, I think, 4,300 students who were denied admittance to the university outright that, again, had higher scores than these non-resident students that were admitted in those last 3 years. So that's why we felt it was something we needed to bring to the legislature and the public's attention, that this change in standard didn't necessarily result in selling seats. We didn't reach that conclusion.
No idea.
But it clearly shows a trend and a change as far as the ability for a non-resident student to compete against a California resident student.
Just want to make sure I heard you correctly. The bar was lowered for non-resident students, but yet and still, resident students had higher scores, whether it's SAT, GPA, and was not admitted?
That's correct. Was either referred to Merced or not admitted outright.
Final question, Mr. Chair. How long did it take for you to do this report? How many man-hours was allocated for this report?
I don't have the actual hours, Mr. Gibson. This report, as you recall, you were the chair of the committee at the time it was approved. The audit committee asked us to delay commencing the audit because the governor and President Napolitano were in negotiations. So we didn't start this audit until last summer in July, and as you know, we completed it last month. I don't have the hours off the top of my head right now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Nazarian had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I very much appreciate the line of questions, but I just want to ask, is there someone from UC who can also be part of this conversation and back and forth? Because I think the questions we're asking, it'll benefit all of us if we get a response from the state auditor and someone from UC so that we can better decipher. And maybe we won't even need to ask some of the questions because they'll be also at the table at responding to some of them. So that was just point one.
You know, I do have a representative from the UC going to be doing a presentation. We could, if you want to stop and bring them forward, and we can have them both. I know they have a presentation as well.
I'd like that. The only thing is, though, since we're in the line of questioning also, I can wait, but there's some things being said that I just also want to kind of chime in. Mr. Williams started asking some questions, and I thought where he was going to go was potentially the 2 or 3% in the coming out of the pool. Have we looked at where that 97 or 98% that ended up not attending any of the UC schools, where their first choice or second choice was, and where they ended up going? We have no answer on that. Okay, that's
based on the data that we got from the UC. We weren't able to determine which campuses those students had listed as their campus of choice.
Okay. Well, because there's some glaring holes in this. So I'd very much appreciate if someone from UC was here to also offer their perspective as well.
Okay. I just have 3 other members who want to share a few comments, and I'll bring the representative from the UC to sit down and do the presentation. We'll go from questions from there as well. So next I had Member Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Auditor, for your work on this. I've read every page of your report as well as UC's materials and have them here, and I look forward to asking questions and giving UC's representatives an opportunity to engage in the discussion for sure. I wanted to follow up on some of the points that Mr. Williams was raising. If I remember correctly, you identified that even when the state legislature provided a 42% increase in funding to the University of California, non-resident revenue increased 80%. So even is it correct that what you were saying is even when we were giving more money, non-resident revenue was continuing to dramatically rise? Did I read the chart correctly? Okay.
Yes, you read the chart correctly. And that's one of the concerns, because the university's position was we had to do this. We had to increase the number of non-resident students because of the appropriation reductions. So we would have expected, as the appropriations start to come back, that they would reduce the number of non-resident students coming into the system, and quite the contrary. It's accelerated at a faster pace.
Okay. And in addition, going to the cost side, because when I arrived here a little over a year ago, one of the first questions I asked UC is, look, I get the situation you were in. Everybody, families, businesses, organizations, the whole state experienced cutbacks. What did you do to retain fixed costs, reduce costs, so that you can put that money into preserving seats for California students? And heard the $660 million figure raised. What I'm hearing from you is that they were unable to substantiate the $660 million. Did you say there was $400 million they were maybe able to substantiate, or any amount of that?
Of the $664 million, the university was unable to provide us any kind of accounting reports or other data that showed that clearly that number had been achieved, and that the money had actually been measurable. When we looked at the 13 projects, we said, okay, all of this money, you say, goes back to your academic and research missions. And what the university told us, no, some of that money, $467 million of it, we are allowing campuses or the unit that generated that savings to keep that savings. So if, for example, a unit participates in the managed travel program, saves $10,000, it doesn't have to reduce its budget by $10,000 because of that savings. It just has that $10,000 to use elsewhere. So from our viewpoint, that's not redirecting it back. It's keeping it in the administrative area where it was originally at. And the overall focus of the Working Smarter program was to achieve savings in administrative areas and new revenue, and transfer that back to the academic and research missions. And for $467 million of it, the program was set up not to even do that with that money. Okay. The remaining $197 million, yes.
And I've heard the refrain that we have. I'm looking at UC's report that enrollment of California resident depends on two things: the master plan and the availability of dollars, state dollars in particular, to fund a resident enrollment. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that your report wasn't just here's all your problems, you're stuck with it. It is recommendations. And one of the ones you didn't address in much detail, I think, in your testimony was that the retirement plan at the university is the second largest recipient of state funds that they have. Can you comment at all on a little bit more on what is happening there? Where are some missteps so that we can take away possibility for going forward on some cost containment?
Absolutely. Go ahead, John.
So the university in 1990 decided, based on an actuary study, that it didn't need to pay its contribution or the employee's share into its retirement plan. At that point, it suspended those contributions. In about 2005, the university acknowledges that it recognizes that there's a problem. There's a growing unfunded liability in its retirement plan. It delayed restarting its contributions and its employees' contributions for another 5 years while it was trying to work with the state. It felt that it should be treated the same way that the California State University and the community colleges are treated, which is that the state picks up their share, their employer's share of the retirement plan. The university waited 5 years, still didn't get that resolution, and then it began to start making contributions in 2010, albeit at a lower rate than what the state contributes now. In 2012-13, I believe it was, the state provided the UC $89 million in its state general fund allocation that year to pay into its retirement plan. The UC continues to take that amount out every year as a kind of set aside, and it's listed in one of our tables, to fund its retirement plan. More recently, the university has worked out a deal internally to use some of its investment funds to invest in its retirement plan to help fund it, and also to use some additional funding from the state.
Okay. Well, and I know there are many other measures in here for potential cost savings. I'm of the belief that those state dollars that UC is telling us they need as one of the two components of enrolling a California resident are there. It does come from this legislature being part of the solution with them and collaborating with them and providing, when we can, additional funding. It has to also include looking at the dollars you already have. And there's a lot. Just the travel program alone was $9 million a year. So I appreciate that you've gone into that detail and look forward to additional questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Roth, you had a question?